Picture a scene that simply should not exist. If you pitched this as fiction today, they would laugh you out of the room. You have the English army. They are the most powerful military force in late medieval Europe. They are disciplined. They are winning. And they are absolutely terrified. They are not terrified of a massive opposing army or a legendary grizzled general. They are terrified of a 17-year-old girl. She stands 5'2". She cannot read. She cannot write her own name. She has never ridden a warhorse until a few months prior and never held a sword. She has no business being on a battlefield. Yet in 1429, this teenage peasant girl convinces a king to give her command of his forces. She lifts a siege that had been strangling France for months. She changes the map of Europe forever. We are talking, of course, about Joan of Arc. But the problem with Joan is that she is so famous, she has become two-dimensional. We see the statue in the town square. We see the saint in the stained glass window, or the martyr in the fire. We see the icon and not the human being. That is the tragedy. The symbol obscures the person. Welcome to History Titans. Before we step into the flames of history, make sure to like and subscribe to uncover more legends of the past. The incredible thing about Joan of Arc is that we do not have to guess who she was. We do not have to rely on legends written a century later. We have the transcripts. We have the verbatim records from her trial in 1431 that condemned her to death, and the rehabilitation trial, 25 years later, that cleared her name. We can hear her actual voice. When you read those records, the saint image shatters. You do not find a quiet, demure figure. You find a young woman who is sassy, incredibly sharp, and surprisingly practical. You find a teenager who outwitted 50 of the smartest lawyers in Europe for weeks on end. Today we strip away the gold leaf and the myths. We look at the life of Joan of Arc through the historical record itself. From her village of Domremy all the way to the fire in Rouen. We will understand how a farm girl became a warrior, why she was burned, and how in the end she won. Joan does not drop out of the sky into a peaceful world. She is born into a complete disaster, the 100 Years' War. The name is a misnomer. It was not one long, continuous battle, but a series of conflicts. By the time Joan is born around 1412, this war has been the backdrop of life for generations. It is the only world anyone knows. France is not a unified country. It is fractured. It is broken. The English control the north, including Paris. But it is worse than an invasion. It is a civil war. It was not a clean French versus English fight. It was French versus French. You had the Burgundians, who were loyal to the powerful Duke of Burgundy, allied with the English. Then you had the Armagnacs, loyal to the Dauphin Charles VII, the heir to the French throne. This blood feud came from the very top. We must look to Queen Isabeau of Bavaria. The Dauphin's own mother essentially sold out her son. In 1420, she signed the Treaty of Troyes. This treaty declared her son Charles was illegitimate. It disinherited him. It agreed that the crown of France would go to Henry V of England and his heirs. It created a massive crisis of legitimacy. If the queen herself says her son is not the rightful heir, who are the people supposed to follow? A prophecy started circulating through the countryside. France would be lost by a woman and saved by a maiden. Lost by a woman, meaning Isabeau. The population was primed for a savior. Into this fractured, desperate world, Joan is born in the tiny village of Domremy. It is often painted as an idyllic, quiet, pastoral village, but the map tells a different story. It is a frontier zone. Domremy sits right on the border of Lorraine and France. It was a tiny island of Armagnac loyalty, completely surrounded by hostile Burgundian territory. They were neighbors with the enemy. Joan's father, Jacques d'Arc, was a tenant farmer and a local official who organized the village watch. Joan grew up hearing reports of raids and skirmishes constantly. It was not abstract. Mercenaries raided the village. They burned the church. The entire family, including Joan, had to flee to a nearby town called Neufchâteau just to survive. Joan knew the trauma of being a refugee. She had seen her own church burned. Yet she was a normal kid. She was pious and known for being skilled at spinning and sewing. Later, at her trial, she bragged she could match any woman in Rouen with a needle and thread. But crucially, she was illiterate. She did not know A from B. Then came the summer of 1425. She is 13 years old. It is noon in her father's garden. She sees a great light coming from the direction of the church. This is the beginning of the voices. She was not instantly accepting. She was terrified. In her own words, she said, "I was very much afraid." Over time, she identifies them as Saint Michael, the Archangel, Saint Catherine of Alexandria, and Saint Margaret of Antioch. Saint Michael is the captain of the heavenly armies. If you are going to war, he is the one you want. The commands start basic. Be a good girl. Go to church. Then they get geopolitical. They gave her a mission with 4 specific objectives. 1. Remain a virgin. 2. Go to France to the royal court of the Dauphin. 3. Raise the siege of Orléans. 4. Lead the Dauphin to Reims to be crowned king. Reims was vital for legitimacy. For centuries, French kings were crowned in the Cathedral of Reims with the holy oil. You were not really the king until you were anointed there. But Reims was deep in enemy territory. It was militarily impossible for Charles to get there. The voices are telling a 13-year-old peasant girl to do the impossible. She keeps this secret for 5 years. She knows how dangerous this sounds. Her father actually had a dream she ran off with soldiers. He told her brothers if that happens, drown her. He was terrified for her honor and her soul. But by 1428, the situation in France is absolutely critical. The English are besieging Orleans. If Orleans falls, the south of France is wide open. The war is effectively over. The English will have won. It is the last domino. The voices have become more urgent. They tell her, "Go, daughter of God, go." So she makes her move. She uses a relative as an excuse to leave her village and goes to the town of Vaucouleurs. This is a nearby fortified town and an Armagnac stronghold. The commander there is a man named Robert de Baudricourt. He is a hardened soldier and a cynical minor noble. Joan, the 16-year-old, walks in and says, "God sent me to take you to the king." Baudricourt reacts exactly as you would expect. He laughs in her face. He tells her uncle box her ears and take her back to her father. It is dismissive. It is sexist. But she does not leave. She stays in the town, and her charisma begins to work. She stops trying to convince the commander and starts talking to the people. She talks to the soldiers in the garrison. She goes to mass every day. She builds a following. The people of Vaucouleurs remember the prophecy about a maid saving France. They see this pious, intense young woman who speaks with absolute conviction. One of Baudricourt's own squires, Jean de Nouillompont, goes to her and asks, "Must the king be driven from the kingdom? And are we to be English?" It is a question of despair. She looks him in the eye and says, "No one in the world, neither king, nor duke, nor daughter of the King of Scots, can recover the kingdom of France except me." The confidence is staggering. It eventually wears Baudricourt down. He thinks, what have I got to lose? If she is crazy, she will die on a road. If she is real, well, we are losing anyway. He gives her a sword and an escort. This is the moment she completely changes her appearance. The townspeople chip in and buy her men's clothing. A tunic, hose, boots, the whole outfit. This becomes the central obsession of her trial later. Why did she do it? It was practical for riding, but primarily, it was a safety measure. She is about to ride 300 miles through enemy territory with a group of soldiers she barely knows. So riding astride a horse in a dress is difficult, but wearing men's clothes specifically. The hose that could be tied and laced to the doublet made it much harder for someone to assault her. It was a physical deterrent against rape. She cuts her hair like a page boy, puts on the clothes, and rides out. They ride at night. They sleep in forests and ford rivers in the dark, constantly dodging Burgundian patrols. It is an 11-day journey. Finally, they reach Chinon, where the Dauphin Charles holds his court. Charles is not a warrior king. He is paralyzed by indecision. He is broke, literally pawning the crown jewels to pay for food. He is deeply insecure about his own birthright because his mother disinherited him. When he hears this maid is coming, he is skeptical. He decides to test her. He gathers the whole court in the great hall and hides himself in the crowd wearing plain clothes. He puts a courtier on the throne to act as a decoy. If she is really sent by God, she will know who the true king is. Joan walks in. She is 17, dressed like a boy, dusty from the road. She ignores the decoy on the throne. She scans the room, walks straight to Charles, who is trying to blend in with the crowd, and she kneels. She says, "Gentle Dauphin, I am Joan the Maid, and the King of Heaven sends word that you will be crowned at Reims." Charles is a cynic. He needs more than that. He takes her aside for a private conversation. Joan refused, even under threat of torture, to reveal what was said. But historical consensus believes she told him something known only to him and to God. She likely revealed the details of a private prayer Charles had made, asking for a sign if he was the true heir. In that moment, she gave him the one thing he didn't have: confidence. But he does not just hand her the army. He has to be incredibly careful. If she turns out to be a witch or a heretic, his enemies will claim his crown comes from the devil. He sends her to Poitiers to be examined by the most learned theologians in the land. It is weeks of intense interrogation. They test her faith, her morals, and her virginity. A committee of matrons examines her to ensure she is physically a virgin, because the belief was a witch had to copulate with the devil to get her powers. The theologians try to trip her up. A friar with a thick Limousin accent asks, "What language do your voices speak?" Joan snaps back, "A better one than yours." Another asks, "If God wishes to deliver France, why do you need soldiers?" Joan replied, "The soldiers will fight, and God will give the victory." It was the perfect theological answer. She passes all the tests. Charles gives her the green light. She gets a suit of white armor, made specifically for her. For the sword, she does something strange. She tells them to go to the church of St. Catherine de Fierbois. She had never been there, but she says, "Dig behind the altar. You will find a sword buried there with 5 crosses on it." They dig and find an old rusted sword with 5 crosses etched on the blade. They clean it up, and the rust supposedly just falls away. She did not even like the sword that much. She said she loved her banner 40 times more than her sword because she never wanted to kill anyone. The banner was her command tool. When she raised it, the army moved. It was a symbol of leadership. April 1429. She has her armor, her banner, her army. She marches to Orléans. The popular image of this battle is wrong. It was not just Joan waving a flag and charging blindly. The relief of Orléans required specific tactical maneuvering. The city was surrounded by English forts. The French commander, the bastard of Orléans, later Count Dunois, was trying to bring a convoy of supplies into the starving city via the Loire River. But he had a massive problem: the wind. The boats were loaded with food, but the wind was blowing downstream. To get to the city, they had to sail upstream. With the wind against them, the heavy barges were sitting ducks for the English artillery. They were stuck. Dunois was furious and about to give up. And right at that moment, Joan arrives on the bank. She does not look at the map. She looks at the river. She looks at the sails. She just says, "Wait." She tells them the wind will change. Dunois is skeptical. He knows the weather patterns of this river. But then suddenly the wind shifts 180 degrees. It becomes a perfect tailwind. The sails catch, and the barges power upstream, right past the English guns and into the city. Dunois testified later that this was the moment he stopped doubting her. It was not just magic. It was a tangible tactical miracle that saved the entire operation. The supplies are in. The city is saved from starvation. Now the fighting starts. Joan is not directing from the rear. She is leading the charges. She insists on attacking the English forts one by one. Saint-Lô, Les Augustins. She completely changes the psychology of the French army. Before she arrived, they were terrified to leave the city walls. With her, they are storming fortifications. Then comes the main assault on Les Tourelles, the biggest English fortress. It is the bloodiest day of the siege, May 7th. Joan is climbing a scaling ladder banner, in hand urging the men on. An English arrow slams into her. It hits right between the neck and the shoulder, just above the breastplate. It goes 6 inches deep into her body. That should be a fatal wound. She falls. The English on the walls erupt in cheers. They think the witch is dead. The French soldiers carry her off the field. But here is the wild part. She had predicted this. Weeks earlier, she had told the king she would be wounded at Orleans exactly like this. She is bleeding out in the field. She pulls the arrow out herself. She weeps from the pain. No, she is still human. She is 19, but she refuses to leave. They dress the wound with lard and olive oil. She confesses to her chaplain. Then, as the French assault is failing and the commanders are sounding the retreat, she gets up. She sees her banner still near the wall. She puts her helmet back on and walks back towards the battle. Imagine being an English soldier on that wall. You just saw her get shot. You thought she was dead. Now she is coming back. It was psychological warfare of the highest order. The English panic. They thought she was a demon. They thought she was immortal. They crumbled. The French swarmed the walls. The fort fell. The next day, the entire English army packed up their things and retreated. The siege of Orleans was over. She did in 9 days what the French army had not been able to do in 7 months. This incredible victory gave them the momentum for the next phase of her mission, the march to Reims. It is almost like a blitzkrieg phase of her career. They sweep through the Loire Valley, taking the English-held towns of Jargeau-Montbougeoncy. Then comes the Battle of Patay, which was a complete rout that effectively wiped out the core of the English longbow corps. The road to Reims was wide open. In July 1429, Charles VII finally enters the cathedral, the coronation. It is the absolute peak of the story. The organ plays, the incense rises, the holy oil is poured. Charles is finally king. Standing right next to the altar, holding her white banner, is Joan. Later at her trial, the judges asked her why her banner was given such a prominent place of honor. She replied with one of her most famous lines. It had shared in the pain. It was only right it should share in the honor. If this were a movie, this is where the credits would roll. But history is messy. The moment that crown is on his head, King Charles VII starts to pivot. He is a politician now, not a desperate claimant. He wants to secure his gains through diplomacy, not endless war. He opens truce negotiations with the Burgundians, but Joan is a warrior. For her, the mission is not over. She wants to take Paris. She is writing letters to the English, telling them to leave France or die. She and the king start to drift apart strategically. She finally convinces him to let her attack Paris in September, but it is a disaster. The king does not provide enough support. Joan is wounded again, this time a crossbow bolt through the thigh. She is dragged away from the wall, still screaming for the troops to keep attacking. But Charles orders the army to retreat. Soon after, he disbands the army for the winter. He shelves her. Then comes Compiègne, May of 1430. Compiègne is a town under siege by the Burgundians. Joan rides in with a small company of volunteers to help defend it. She leads a sortie and attack outside the walls to disrupt the Burgundian camp. It goes wrong. It is an ambush. The Burgundians counterattack in force. Joan's troops panic and flee back toward the city gate. Joan stays in the rear, fighting to cover their retreat. She is the last one out. But the governor of the town panics. He orders the drawbridge raised and the gate closed. Joan is trapped outside, locked out by her own side. A Burgundian archer grabs her by her gold and scarlet cloak and yanks her off her horse. She hits the ground. She is swarmed. It is over. This is the part that makes you look at Charles VII differently. He is the king. She put the crown on his head. Does he send the army to get her back? Does he offer a ransom? He does absolutely nothing. Total silence. Custom dictated that you ransom important prisoners. Charles had money. He had prisoners he could have swapped. But he calculates that Joan is now a political liability. If she was captured, maybe her divine power was gone. So he just let her rot. But the English wanted her desperately. She was technically a prisoner of the Burgundians, but the English government immediately started negotiations to buy her. They bought her like a piece of merchandise, even for 10,000 livres tournois, a king's ransom. She was transferred to their custody in the city of Rouen. The story shifts genres. It goes from a war epic to a rigged courtroom drama. The Trial of Condemnation, 1431. It was a political assassination, dressed up as a religious trial. They could not just execute her as a prisoner of war because that would make her a martyr. They had to prove she was a witch. If she was a witch, then the coronation of Charles VII was achieved through sorcery. It would invalidate his kingship. They wanted to destroy her soul to destroy his crown. The judge was Bishop Pierre Cochon, a French bishop, but a staunch partisan for the English. He orchestrated the whole thing. They did not hold her in a proper church prison guarded by nuns as canon law required. Cochon kept her in the royal castle at Rouen, a secular military prison. She was kept in a tower cell, chained by the ankles to a heavy block of wood. She was guarded day and night by 5 English soldiers, 5 men in the cell with her at all times. This brings us back to the clothes. She refused to take off the men's outfit. She kept the tunic and the hose tightly laced up. In a dress, she was completely vulnerable. That tight, complex, laced-up outfit was her only defense mechanism against rape, but the judges used it as prime evidence of heresy, citing a passage in Deuteronomy that forbids women from wearing men's clothes. So the trial begins. You have an illiterate, 19-year-old girl, probably malnourished, definitely terrified, facing down 60 of the smartest men in Christendom. Bishops, canons, doctors of law from the University of Paris. The absolute intellectual elite. They interrogated her for months, jumping from theology to military strategy to the fairies in her village, all to try and confuse her. They could not break her. The transcripts are mind-blowing. They tried to trap her on complex theology. The most famous example is the grace question. They asked her, "Do you know yourself to be in the grace of God?" It seems simple, but it was a lethal trap. Church doctrine stated that no human could know for certain if they were in a state of grace. That was God's secret knowledge. If she answered yes, she was a heretic for presuming to know God's mind. If she answered no, she was confessing to being in a state of sin, and they could condemn her immediately. It was a perfect double bind. A logical checkmate. The lawyers leaned forward, quills ready to write her death sentence. Joan, this uneducated teenager, gave one of the most brilliant answers in legal history. She said, "If I am not, may God put me there. And if I am, may God keep me in it." It was flawless. She dodged the sin of presumption, but affirmed her hope in God's mercy. The transcript notes that the judges were stupefied. They had to adjourn the session for the day. They tried to trap her about a fairy tree. They wanted to prove her visions were pagan. They asked about a tree in her village called the Lady's Tree, where local legends said fairies danced. Did she deny the tree existed? No, she was honest. She admitted they danced there as children, but she adamantly denied ever seeing fairies or receiving visions from that source. She kept pulling it back to God. My voices are from God, not from a tree. Eventually, they found their wedge. Authority. They asked her, "Do you submit to the determination of the church on earth?" This meant the Pope, the bishops, and specifically Bishop Cochon and his court. If she says yes, she has to agree that her voices are demons, because the church is telling her they are. If she says no, she is a heretic who rejects the authority of the Pope. Joan said, "I serve the church, but God must be served first." In 1431, that is basically Protestantism before Martin Luther. It is claiming a direct line to God that bypasses the church hierarchy. For them, that was enough to burn her. They drafted the 12 Articles of Accusation. On May 24th, 1431, they take her to the cemetery of St. Ouen. It is a staged public event. A huge crowd. A preacher on a scaffold. An executioner with his cart. They yell at her. They tell her, "Sign this document of abjuration, admit your voices are fake or you burn right now." She is 19. She has been in chains for months. She is sick. She is scared. She breaks. We have to allow her that moment of humanity. She is terrified of the fire. She says, "I submit." She makes a mark on a piece of paper. She recants. The sentence is commuted to life imprisonment on bread and water. She agrees to wear a woman's dress. They shave her head and take her back to the prison. But 4 days later, the judges are called back to her cell, the relapse. This is the most tragic part. They enter her cell, and she is wearing the men's clothes again. Why? One source says the guards took her dress away while she slept. and threw the men's clothes at her, leaving her no choice. So another testimony suggests guards tried to rape her, now that she was in a dress and she put the men's clothes back on to protect herself. The very thing she used for her physical safety was twisted into the legal reason to kill her. It is the ultimate cynical trap. When the judges ask her why she does not mention the guards, she says her voices came back to her. She says they rebuked her for her treason in recanting just to save her life. She says, "What I said for fear of the fire." That seals her fate. A relapsed heretic cannot be forgiven a second time. May 30th, 1431. The old market square in Rouen. It is a grim scene. She is weeping. She asks for a cross. An English soldier breaks a wooden stick and ties it into a crude cross for her. She kisses it and puts it inside her dress. A priest brings a proper crucifix and holds it up so she can see it through the smoke. The fire is lit. As the flames rose, she did not scream curses. She screamed one word over and over: Jesus. She shouted it 6 times. It was the last thing anyone heard her say. Then, the final insult. To make sure there was nothing left, the English raked the ashes and showed the charred body to the crowd to prove she was female and dead. Then they threw everything into the Seine River. They wanted to erase her completely, but it backfired. The executioner reportedly went to a tavern afterwards and collapsed sobbing. He told a monk, "I have burned a saint, I am damned." The English thought they had solved the problem, but they created a martyr. The war did not end. Her commanders Dunois and La Hire kept fighting. By 1453, the English were almost completely driven out of France, just as she had prophesied. Which brings us to the final chapter, the nullification. In 1450, Charles VII is the undisputed king, but he has a PR problem. His coronation was engineered by a convicted witch. It stains his legitimacy. So he orders an inquiry, the rehabilitation trial of 1456. This is a deeply emotional event. Joan's mother, Isabelle Romy, is still alive. She is an old woman now. She travels to Paris. She walks into the great cathedral of Notre Dame and throws herself at the feet of the papal legates, weeping, demanding justice for her daughter. The court interviewed everyone left alive. They exposed the corruption. They revealed the English threats. The court declared the 1431 trial null and valid, worthless. They symbolically tore the pages of accusation out of the official record books and burned them. Joan of Arc was legally vindicated. A peasant girl, illiterate from nowhere, who directs the course of European history, gets crushed by the machine of church and state, and then 25 years after she is dead, she beats the machine. She beats it because she was genuine. You can burn the body, but you cannot burn the testimony. The very document they created to destroy her became her eternal monument. If you want to dive deeper into the lives of people who shaped our world, make sure you are subscribed to History Titans. Hit that follow button so you don't miss out. Thanks for listening.